The report is in a sense, is an examination of the multiple challenges that go far beyond the terrorism discourse that we've seen very much at the headline news in terms of characterizing the Mali crisis. And I wanted to make that very clear that the one thing that we guarded against, or wanted the international community to guard against last year when we first started writing the report, was to not see Mali through the war and terror lens. And it's important to bear that in mind because from our own analysis, the very first layer of crisis in Mali is one of governance, and linked to that one of corruption and nepotism, which gave a number of opposition groups and the military a license to begin the rebellion and the junta last year. So I want to set that quite clear, that this is really, at the first level, an issue of governance at the heart of the Malian state. Of course, we can't ignore the fact that there's a real crisis in northern Mali, which laid the foundations for a rebellion. The trigger effect, of course, was the return of a number of armed combatants coming back from Libya. And it's a trigger, not the cause of the conflict. And added to that, of course, is the fact that Mali has become, over a period of time, a haven for a network of terrorist groups and who coalesced in what essentially is a no man's land and were allowed to commit a number of abuses, including criminal activities as well. So the north itself became a haven for a number of unfortunate international and regional security dilemmas as well. But the very first thing in our assessment is understanding the Mali crisis as very much an internal, and yes, there is an external dimension to that crisis. And that's what the report tries to focus on. I say that we are fortunate that we are presenting this report on the eve of the Security Council passing of the resolution. We see this as, in a sense, the Mali as a test case for the future of international peacekeeping, because the Council is being asked to marry various objectives together. The objective of how to rebuild a country that faces a number of internal pressures, but dealing also with the reality, the very complex range of security dilemmas that has a very large-scale regional and international terror dimension. So how do you marry the objective of national dialogue, dealing with trying to put together a political process and deal with the glaring insecurity of the war, of the terror campaign against jihadist groups as well. So it is a very difficult process, and those of you who are familiar with Afghanistan and Somalia will see very much the very same issues are being raised now within the Mali context. How you marry and how you put together a stabilization mission plus this parallel force that has to deal with counterterrorism at the same time. And the report tries to find a number of answers for the Security Council, while asking it to clarify the relationship between the stabilization force and a parallel force that has this counter-terror strategy around it as well. One of the things that we want to make clear in this report, and what we've set out very clearly in this report, is that the French intervention itself has considerably changed the situation in Mali. Those of you who are watching Mali on the eve of the French intervention will know that the country was on the verge of a second coup. And in a sense, the French intervention stopped that from happening. And I don't think anybody can ignore the fact that this was an enormous sea change in what was happening in Mali. There had been a period of 9 months of stalemate. And in a sense, this intervention halted the potential for another coup and halted the glaring lack of willingness to pursue a political strategy at the Bamako level. But we've had the French intervention, and I think the French will be the first one to tell you that we need to bring the political track back online and that we can't continue with a security-first dimension. And our report is an attempt to offer what we think are the step-by-step approaches that need to be taken to deal with the political process. And what we say or try to articulate in the report, that the two have to go in tandem, that the security train cannot be allowed to go full steam ahead. It must carry and underpin the political process throughout. Let me conclude by saying that there are two big challenges ahead for the UN and for the French mission and also for others involved in this process. At the one level is the stabilization mission. And we cannot ignore the fact that the UN is entering a very difficult climate where the situation is not just one of governance and restoring the state authority, but making sure that the state itself does not abdicate its responsibility to the UN with the assumption that the UN is going to do the heavy lifting for it politically. That it's important that the UN stabilization mission doesn't freeze the situation, but makes sure that it holds the Bamako authorities to account and to pursue a political process. And the second issue tied to that is the fact that elections are necessary to end the transition, but they can't be at any cost. That while we recognize that there has to be an attempt to bring back a semblance of order and democracy in the country, that the moment may not necessarily be ripe for elections, and that a number of steps need to be taken before that process unfolds. So these we see in the next coming months are the big challenges: the deployment of the future UN stabilization force in a very dangerous territory where the enemy is not clear. There is no peace agreement. It's not clear who the enemies are. And also, the situation goes way beyond Mali. And Mali cannot be asked to solve all the regional insecurity dilemmas that go way beyond Mali and also deal with the Sahel question as well. And my final point on this is that one of the missing links in the process is to get clarity on the Sahel strategy which the UN itself initiated last September. It's the one piece of the puzzle that is not clear. A stabilization mission has been defined, a parallel force the French are going to lead is going to be defined, but this regional international security dimension is not clear, and Mali cannot be the prism in which to solve these problems and find a transnational solution. Can start at Mali, but it goes way beyond the Mali, and it requires you to deal with the Maghreb states, the West African states, and the international community as well. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Comfort. Before questions, I just wanted to say a couple of things. The report is, of course, available at crisisgroup.org, as all our reports are. You can find us on Twitter, and we announce all of our reports there as well, including translations as they become available. Question? Mr. Lee?
Yeah, sure. Thanks a lot. I'm sure you'll probably hear from over there, but on behalf of the Free UN Coalition for Access, thanks for doing this. I wanted to ask you about Azawad. This seems like there's some tensions about, or I'd like to know what your view of what the mission should be doing in terms of either recapturing or collaborating with the Malian army in recapturing Kidal and other areas. The Chadians have said that they have some problems in terms of what their role is in terms of allowing in or escorting in the Malian army. So what do you think is going to happen with this concept of Azawad as the mission deploys, and also how would you, I guess, assess the performance of Mr. Prodi thus far as a Sahel envoy? Has it been a useful role? What more should he be doing? Thanks.
There is one of the things that we did in the report was to look at the French intervention, but also to look at the security threats in the three liberated areas. And Kidal is a special case for the reasons that I think you were articulating. We were very clear in the report that there must be a willingness to include all the various armed groups who are committed to renouncing the armed struggles at the table, that there mustn't be an attempt to exclude the various groups from the process. How you treat, I think that the French have been concerned and to a certain degree, as we said in the report, surprised by how a number of observers have responded to how the French have treated the Kidal situation. I think in our mind, nobody can be excluded from the process. Bamako and ordinary citizens of Mali, particularly of Bamako, themselves have been increasingly skeptical of some of the demands that have been put on the table by the Azawad group or the MLA rebellion group as well. But our simple position on this is that you can't imposed preconditions on the dialogue process. And we were concerned that the initial draft of the resolution was demanding a number of preconditions that amounted to surrender. And the sense was that that beyond asking them to renounce the armed struggle, that you had to stop short from making other demands, but to ensure that you pushed for an inclusive process that included them. Tied to that, however, we said that there had to be an inter-communal dialogue between the various groups, because it's not a coherent entity. It doesn't represent all the views of the Tuareg communities, and it doesn't represent the North as well. And so there has to be a discussion among those groups. Now, whether the Malian army is seen as a legitimate force that can enter into Kidal is still unclear. They do not have a legitimate base throughout the country. And you will recognize also that the French were very much attuned to the ramifications of allowing the Malian military to go into Kidal, because of these questions about their legitimacy as well. On the question of Rimado Prodi, I mean, back in September, we welcomed the decision by the SG on the sidelines of the General Assembly to call for a Sahel strategy and to announce a special envoy. It's something that we had advocated for, so we welcome it. I think we're disappointed that it's been very slow in process. We're disappointed that it may come after the creation of the resolution. We think it's tied to and should be part of the strategy to help deal with Mali, but to also ensure that there's a regional response to the Malian crisis. As I said, there is the crisis does start with the issue of governance, but there is a regional security dimension, and Mali can't be expected to fix the ills of regional security. And so this strategy becomes part and parcel, or should be part and parcel, and integrated within the resolution that is emerging tomorrow.
Mr. McFarquhar?
Hi, Neil McFarquhar from the New York Times. Just to follow on that, even before the rebels came back from Libya, there was a problem getting all the region to sit down, and there was a sense that sort of Algeria was perfectly happy with the status quo because they pushed their Al-Qaeda problem south and it was under control. So has that dynamic changed at all, and how are the regional players sort of looking at this force?
Yeah, I mean, in a sense, one of the positive outcomes of this crisis is that it's potentially forced two regions to come together, the Sahel, Maghreb, and West Africa. I think it's also worth reminding ourselves that before the French intervention and before, as things turned around in January, Algeria had been very lukewarm to the idea of any kind of military intervention. It was pursuing, it preferred a dialogue, it preferred to support the Ouagadougou peace dialogue process that was ongoing. The Algerians have done several things which are quite fundamental to the process. It gave a space, an airspace to the French to come in to put in place their own airstrikes against the jihadist forces. They've also been in conversations with the French, and anyone who knows French-Algerian history will know that this was quite a significant moment as well. And Algeria itself did not fundamentally criticize the intervention by France. So these are quite three significant issues, and I think the French, without speaking on behalf of them, have been very cognizant of this delicate balancing act that they have to play with Algeria. I think Algeria finally itself made the determination that it needed to be part of this process after the hostage crisis, which clearly showed the link, coincidentally or indirectly or directly, between the crisis in Mali and what was happening in its own internal borders. And it's also clear to most of us who've been observing Mali that the north of Mali is the south of Algeria, that there is no real distinction for most Algerians and Malians. There's a lot of cross-border affinity, and Kidal being the most strategic of all of that as well.
Ms. Lupo.
Yes, Evelyn Leopold. I'd like to welcome you on behalf of oh, it's not on. It's not on? You've got another minute? Never mind. He says it's on. Can you hear me?
I can hear you fine, but then you're only 6 feet away.
Okay. Hello?
Yes.
Evelyn Leopold, and I'd like to welcome you on behalf of the United Nations Correspondents Association. My question is, the French keep wanting to leave or to downgrade their force. Do you think the jihadists, anybody can control the jihadists if the French leave, because they've been the main counterweight against them? Also, are the leaders of this group still the Algerians? What is Algeria doing anything about it, to follow up on Neil's question?
I think, again, I don't want to sound as though I'm a spokesperson for the French mission, but there are certain things that we all agree on, and the French will be the very first one to say it, and we try to articulate it in our report, that we're careful to announce that there's some kind of victory over the jihadist groups. These are groups that are highly mobile. They're very nomadic. And I think the French will be the first to say that they haven't gotten rid of the jihadists. And in fact, that at the one level, it's a tactical victory for the French, but they haven't been able to push or eradicate these various groups in northern Mali. And in a sense, most of them may have retreated to the mountainous areas. At one level, what they did in January was suicidal, but at another level, their own approach has been to retreat, knowing full well that there was a potential for an international response to their own attempts to push down to Bamako. I think the French will be the very first ones to tell you, based on lessons learned from other places, that their work is not done. And that's why I think there's a degree of nervousness at the level of the Security Council to slow down the initial request by France to withdraw, and to make sure that there is an integration and coordination between the stabilization mission and any offensive operation that the French need to pursue to clean up the area. It should make it clear also that the whole history of jihadist or terror networks didn't start last year with the rebellion.